My name is Jeannie Hertzler, and I work out of the Patent West office. And I'd like to welcome you to the closing of day 2 of the 2024 Patent Literacy Symposium. We hope that you are enjoying the many information-packed sessions we have with an elite lineup of literacy experts. We encourage you to share all you are learning via the hashtag PatentLit24 across all of your social media platforms. To prepare our minds for this afternoon's keynote session, our speaker shares the following. The path towards getting the greatest number of students to read has been well established by research consensus and brain science for decades. While the essential practices have been given many names, science of reading, structured literacy, evidence-based instruction, the fundamentals have remained the same. It's not a question of a pendulum swing. The question is whether we have the will, leadership, resources, and humility to put kids first. And now, to close out the second day of the Patent Literacy Symposium, please welcome the inspiring Kareem Weaver as he offers today's keynote address, Excellence and Literacy.
Thank you, Jeannie. Much appreciated. And I'm so glad to be here. I don't know how inspiring this will be. This is a meat and potatoes, nuts and bolts presentation. Maybe a little inspiring at times, but this is one you may have to have a pencil and paper ready because we're going to get into the weeds a little bit because we've got some stuff to go through. And I'm just so glad that you all invited me to join and offer a few things that can be useful to people at various places within school systems. Okay, with that being said, thank you for the introduction. Let's jump right into it. The first thing is you may want to take notes. That's fine. That's your call. But there is a QR code there along with the tiny URL underneath it. And if you just click on that or type that in or write down the tiny URL, the slide deck will pop up. So there's no need to rush and take notes as I'm talking. To save yourself a lot of time, and that way we can engage more fully. And then at the end, at your leisure, you can go through and click the links. Most of the images are links that are live, and you can click on them and go to wherever you need to go, etc. So I'll give you a moment to either write down the tiny URL or use your camera phone to to bookmark the link via the QR code. Excellence and literacy. But the second part of that is where I'm after today. What do I do? And I want to be really clear on who I'm talking to when I say what do I do, because there's various stakeholders, as I'm sure you've seen in the abstract. So this is something, this is for later review. This isn't for now. You know, when you're scrolling down a line and a week from now or tomorrow, when you're trying to say, what was that thing about? I'm putting the full session description and abstract there so you can see it, so you'll know what that slide deck is about and you'll know what this is about. But we're not going to go over the nuts and bolts of this right now. Instead, we're going to take it piece by piece and break it down so that we really can get a good understanding of what the answers to some of these questions are. And my goal is to challenge you today. So I think that my role here is to support understanding, but also to challenge some ideas and the way we think about literacy and our relationship to it as educators. So first, I'm going to just go through a few aspects of the session description. I mean, we'll talk about the essential practices, the brain science, and the research and census. We'll go through that. This whole idea of a pendulum swing. We'll go through that. You know, is this really another pendulum swing? We'll talk about that, and then we'll get into the heart of the doing and the why and the how, etc. So that's where we're at today. All right, ready, set, go. So first, I want to step back. The abstract talked about the need to grapple with this principle or this idea of equity. What is equity? And I've seen and experienced working with districts and schools and grade levels and states where equity itself seemed to be the virtue. And so I want to push on that a little bit and really flesh out this idea of equity. And I'm going to use a different word to start with. So let's look at unity. What does unity mean? This is an example. Unity by itself, it's a relational word. you can't have unity in isolation and have it be of meaning, because unity deals with a group of things, whether it be two or more, that are coming together. It's a relational term. And it's important because equity functions much the same way. So, for example, showing my age here, but Plato and Aristotle, old unity of virtues, those of us who like the classics, they talked about that it has to be a holistic term. It's not an isolated term. Unity for unity's sake means nothing. It's what are you unifying for? What are you unifying about? The old folks used to say, "It's not what you got; it's how you use it that counts." You know, bank robbers have unity. It's not necessarily an intimation that it's a good thing. To be unified is a function of two or more things put together, but it's what they're unifying about which gives it its value, whether it's good or bad. We can have bank robbers who are unified. We can have who knows? We can have basketball players that are unified. We can have chefs who are unified. It just depends on the context and how it's being used and how that relationship is actually operating. Similarly, equity functions much the same way. Equity itself is an abstract principle. It is not a virtue in and of itself. So I may, oftentimes I'm talking with state directors of literacy or other folks at even district levels or even school levels sometimes, and we elevate equity to the point where it becomes a virtue in and of itself and a department. And while I'm not trying to belittle equity, it's important to know that it is relational. The question is, what or who are we holding as the standard? What is the fixed point? What is the vertex? What is the point to which we're assigning an equitable relationship? And if it's an outcome term, then the question is, what is the outcome relationship to equity that we're so enlivened by in our sector? Let me go a little bit deeper. I'm sure you've seen that image. It is a very popular image in the education circuit. But what does it mean? Of course, the thinking is it's not, we don't treat everyone the same. We treat people according to their need, and we allocate resources accordingly. That's usually how the thinking goes. But I have a question for you. What if we distribute those resources strategically according to the need, and we do all the things that our framework says we should be doing for equity's sake? And some groups get a little bit more of this, some groups get a little bit more of that, their needs are met here, or we're attempting to meet their needs there, and we approach it equitably. We're providing equitable instruction, but the proficiency rates for reading are the same for these students across these demographic areas, and they're at 15%. Is that equity? Is it equity? Even though we have done the things that most of us would characterize, or our sector has traditionally characterized as being equitable, my push is that equity has to be tied to a standard. And the standard is excellence. So that means that it's not just that we're distributing resources strategically, but that we're doing it so that the outcome is what we need it to be. So I would say this is not equity. And I would leave it to you. I should just leave it to you to wrestle with on your own. What outcomes should be wrapped up in our definition of equity? Or are they? And let's just be honest about that. If someone would say, look, I don't care what the outcomes are, it's the approach that matters. I would push on that, but I leave that to your own conscience and your own deliberations. Okay. Further in the session, it notes that there has a research consensus, and it's been out for years. This is nothing new. This isn't a pendulum swing. This is something that we have been wrestling with for a while in terms of literacy. You'll see these are linked. So when you go there, you'll be able to click on them. But the National Reading Panel, years and years ago, and they talked about what are the things that kids need to develop into good readers. And they listed the 5 elements, the phonemic awareness, the phonics, the fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. But, thanks to Elsa Cardenas Hagen, she said, Kareem, there's a second reading panel, and it was for multi-language, for language minority children, for second language learners. I didn't know that. So I bought it, read through that thick book. It's fascinating because they say many of the same things the National Reading Panel says, but there are a few differences, which I'll talk about a little bit today. And then AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, has a seminal piece about teaching reading is rocket science. And then, of course, John Hattie's Visible Learning. So these are seminal pieces, but this has been around for decades. These things are not new. National Reading Panel was out years and years ago. In fact, this is another piece from the Department of Juvenile Justice. I cite this often because this was in 1993, and they talked about teachers as a result of their training, their pre-service, their university work. They've been denied a working knowledge of reading, of the methods of instruction, and they talk about the research consensus and things like that. Experimental research at the time. This was 30 years ago, and so this has been known. This is not a pendulum swing. I mean, we've talked about in our sector how things tend to come and go. And it's only natural to get a little bit cynical when things are coming and going all the time. And when one has to wonder, is this another iteration of that? And so what I would just offer is if you're going to say it's a pendulum swing, well, we have to actually drop the ball. We have to actually let the pendulum swing, which means that these elements of an effective reading program that the American Federation of Teachers lined up, that these other entities, that those book links that I gave you, they all are saying the same thing. If these things aren't happening consistently, then the pendulum never swung in the first place. So it's important to understand that, unfortunately, what we might do is we might have one or two or three of these five elements, and then when it doesn't work out, we say, well, the pendulum is swinging. No, we actually have to do the things that are considered the key elements of an effective reading program. Let's go through them if you don't mind, and you'll see in the bottom right hand corner there is a score. So I want you to just track in your own practice, your school, your classroom, your district, your state. How many of these five do you have? Give yourself a rating, 1 out of 5, 5 out of 5. Let's just go through these five elements that AFT lists out. First, they have a strong core reading program. A strong core, that means we're not treating it like Frankenstein and duct taping it together. A strong core reading program that has all of these things embedded, that are aligned with the research consensus. Knowledgeable teachers. It's systematic. That means it's going in order, not because it's Hispanic Heritage Month or it's Black History Month or it's this month or that month, but our scope and sequence is tied to the way kids need to learn the material so that they can build their skills. And of course, then we can attach the content to that as we need. Fine. But we're anchoring it in what kids need to do skills. Strong core reading curriculum. And then high quality PD. There's no getting around that. That means that everyone is trained in the science of reading. And it may not be letters or Gillingham or something like that. It may be AIM Pathways. It may be the Reading League. It may be there's myriad opportunities out there at various levels of a load. But is that available to people, including administrators who are supporting the teachers? And what about the rest of the materials? Not just the unfortunately, I know many folks have a basal reader, but not just the core materials, but all the instructional materials, all the curricular materials. Are they aligned to the research? I say, unfortunately, basal as an aside, because there's really no evidence that the basal structure actually works, but it seems to be canon in many of our schools today. It's just unquestioned doctrine. But are the materials aligned to the research consensus? And then also, what about our reading assessments? Are we still doing F&P? Are we doing levels? Is that what we're doing? Are they appropriate? Do teachers have access to them? That includes screening for children who are at risk of reading difficulty, and that happens early on, pre-K, K1, 2, early on. We don't wait for kids to fail. And then finally, as I said, we don't wait for them to fail. There's timely intervention. And so out of those five, what is your reading program rate? Let's move on. Okay, back to the abstract. So I said that we're going to go across the different stakeholder groups and look at what needs to be done. I know this is ambitious, but I think we can do it. I think we can get there because each of these stakeholder groups has some unique opportunities. Policymakers, system leaders, site administrators, and teachers. The community is also important, but I'm not getting into community today. That's not necessarily the audience that I'm speaking to today. Although I welcome community engagement, I welcome, community folks need to know this stuff, but there's a playbook for community folks for advocacy. You can go to our website at fulcrumliteracy.org and check it out. But today it's about the policymakers, the district folks, the site admins, and the teachers, right? And what needs to be done. Let's go through. Let's start with the policymakers. So Excel and Ed has this early literacy map, and you can go on their website and check it out. Again, this is a live link, so you can just go there when you have the opportunity. And they look to see what the policy landscape is like across the country in the United States. Not only that, but if you look at the top where they have full, partial, future, and not, the question is, are these policies that have been identified as key to early literacy development, are they implemented? Are they operationalized? Some, it's full implementation and it's full go. Others, they've been adopted, but only partially implemented. And some, they've been adopted, but they won't be implemented until some date in the future. Sometimes legislation has that. And then you'll see the red triangle means nothing at all. So we have these different things, but they all tie together for a state's context in terms of how they approach early literacy. Well, Pennsylvania, you may be able to see there, let me blow it up a little bit. Of the 18 early literacy indicators, we've got seven, and they're on the way. They're partially implemented. There are none that are, 100% implemented, unfortunately. And then there are seven that are partially implemented, but there are all these other things that at the policy. So if I'm a policymaker, I'm looking at this list and I'm figuring out what I can do. What are the ones that I can actually sink my teeth in to bring coalition if possible and advocate for these things? So because our kids and our educators who are serving kids need these supports. That compares to other states. I won't go through all of them, but I know there's been a lot of media attention on Mississippi and the way they've turned things around, going from 50th to now the early 20s. I think 21 was the last one I looked at, but they've really made remarkable progress. But the policy environment has really greased the wheels. They've really primed the pump for the growth that's happening in the field. It is doable. It is doable, and you can go across the country, right? And it's not saying that folks have it all figured out. I mean, look at Ohio. They've got a few, but I know Governor DeWine there has made this as big push. But some things are on the way or they're partially implemented, but they've gotten up. They've said, you know what, enough is enough. And they've begun to make some shifts. Then folks like Georgia, states like Georgia, have, 10 are for the future. That means they've got some very active policymakers, and these things are coming. So the pipeline is coming. And it's just a landscape. So that's the section for policymakers. Now for districts, again, we talked about this earlier. How many of these do you have? How many of these elements of an effective reading program are actually in place in your system? And I'll go one step further and say it's not just what's there, it's what's not there. So you have strong reading curriculum, but are there other curriculum being used that may not be as strong? And it's a grab bag. Or do you have instructional materials aligned with the research, but then you have a ton of things that are not aligned with the research? You see, it's not just what you have, but it's the consistency with which you have those things and it's they're applied. For district folks, again, here's another resource. You can go there and check it out. It's the website from the podcast from Ed Trust. So they go district by district, LEA by LEA, and they look to see how they turn things around. Ordinary school districts that are getting extraordinary results. Karen Chenoweth is the person who's going around and interviewing superintendents, board members, principals, teachers, you name it, and walking us through how they did things, walking us through. It is invaluable. I believe there are 5 seasons. They ended up shutting it down because I don't think there was much viewership. But I urge everyone to consider looking through that resource. I won't go through that today, but you can do that on your own. But it is invaluable. This one is from Seaford, Delaware. They went from lowest in the state to tops in 4th grade reading over a course of about 6 years. How in the world does that happen? They walk you through it step by step. I'll refer a little bit later to this district in Seaford, but it definitely is something worth listening to. I think it was season 2, episode 5, if memory serves me well. Okay, now we're still in the district. We haven't gotten to teachers yet or principals, but we're still at district level. Well, if you go around the country and you ask people, hey, what kind of structure? What are some things that we need to have? Well, you're going to get some pretty consistent answers. And one of them has to do with the structure of the system itself. How far away from the CEO or the superintendent, how far away from that person is the one who holds literacy, especially early literacy? Are they in cabinet? Now, at Fulcrum, we said they should be in cabinet. That's the best practice. But we've also seen people who it's one level away from that. So I'm going to play you an example of a team, and they're going to explain how they do it and what it looks like for them. But it makes a difference to have somebody who's in charge of literacy in the cabinet or right next to it. And somebody in that cabinet has got to be able to speak up to the literacy initiative when the budget is getting cut and decisions are being made. Who in there is waving the flag for literacy? That was number 2. Excuse me, that was actually number 2. Number 1 is there should be a curriculum that has evidence of working and that teachers can implement within the bounds of their contracted hours. Now, I know some may not have a labor association. I understand that, a labor partner, fine. But whatever the expectation is that teachers are told, they need to be able to do the job within that expectation. And if there's a contract that says you get 2 hours a week to prepare, well, then we ought to be able to fully prepare for this reading curriculum within that 2 hours. Otherwise, we're hoping, and hope is not a strategy. It's just not. We need hope, but that's not how we're going to get our kids. And I got news for you. The kids who are the furthest away from opportunity, the ones that are reflected in equity and mission statement, they need all of the planning that we can give them. I'll let you hear from these educators to hear how they structured it.
My name is Sarah Moore. I'm the supervisor of elementary education. Dr. Tu and I have been doing this work together for a number of years. We implemented Orton-Gillingham for all students and the literacy rates that we saw that were tied directly to that infusion. I'm the mother of a dyslexic child and the child of a dyslexic mother, so the work is very personal to me.
So I'm Kim Tu. I'm the assistant super of curriculum instruction, and you can see why I love working with Sarah. She is just got a PhD in literacy. I mean, she just knows everything there is to know about it. And I really saw firsthand, she was a supervisor of intervention in our previous district.
But
and
this
really,
is, does anyone own this? Do you have a person whose is it?
it's Sarah, it's right here.
It's Sarah.
And that's why I
Okay.
brought her
Are
here,
you from the
honestly. Like,
how many layers of administration are between you and the soup?
One.
It's Dr. Tu. Yes.
Yeah. She
Dr.
came by
Tu.
Sarah's office earlier to see the therapy dog, you know?
So it's you,
Yeah.
Dr. Tu, and then
Yep.
the soup. So, okay,
Yep.
you've got, so there's a cabinet meeting. Soup is bringing in the cabinet. Is there someone in that meeting who understands and owns the thrust of this? Is that you, Dr. Tu?
That's me.
That's you. Okay, so you got somebody cabinet level who owns and understands this.
Yeah.
Does that matter? Does that make a difference to have somebody
Yes.
at that level of the organization? Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because this is important.
And so I think having someone at the cabinet level who really believes in tiered supports. What happens in tier 1, like Sarah said, the same lingo, the same language is also happening in our tier 2 pull out academic support. That's also happening in our tier 3 one-on-one OG sessions, also happening in special ed, right? That we're all in an aligned system with the same language, the same goals, I think is really important to have at the cabinet level, because that person ultimately, like, I oversee K-12 programming. And so we need to make sure that there is a bridge and consistency throughout all of our services. We're training our ESL teachers as well in OG, so that there's a consistent understanding of how literacy works in our school system.
We've been pushing, no, you actually got to have somebody who, like, this is their thing. This
Yeah.
is their jam. Like, they own this thing.
It is literally the foundation of everything that we do. How are we not having a person dedicated to this work? Because what we're
Okay. With several examples of this, I chose the one where they had a Philadelphia Eagles sweatshirt on. I figured that they would be good for the home team. Although I'm sure there's some Steelers fans here too. Listen, I just wanted to make sure that you hear the thoughtfulness behind the construction of an organization, of a school system. There's someone in the cabinet that speaks for this. They own this. And then the person who's the doer, the director of whatever the title is, they're right there. They're within earshot of the soup. And they're not buried on the org chart. Their needs are getting identified and elevated so that things can get done. When you have too many layers of bureaucracy, things usually don't go well.
My name is Sarah Moore.
Additionally, and these items come from our petition to the school district in Oakland, and we petition them for these things because these are core. Dyslexia screening for all kids K2. It's the opposite of a wait to fail model. You don't want to wait until kids are, older and there's a discrepancy in terms of what they're expected to learn based on our own biases and interpretations and what they are learning. You want to be able to systematically identify kids because it's the time that we offer the screening, remembering that different kids are perceived to have a need at different times. Some kids we more quickly and more readily identify when there are issues because our expectations, with the best of intentions, our expectations may be different for different groups of kids. So screening kids, all kids, is actually an access point. It's a safety net to protect us and the students from any biases we might have and to take advantage of the opportunity to serve kids early on. But better tracking and supports for interventions. We have to make sure that there's a safety net during this season of learning. While educators are figuring it out, we're going to go through the list for principals or site administrators and teachers in just a moment. But what about the kids? While we're figuring this out, what about they only have first grade once or second grade one time. So what about them? And I would urge those of you in the district to think of what are the safety nets that you can provide them. They may not be cheap, but they better work. And I will say this, when they work, you'll know it. You'll know it by the data, and you don't have to talk, in a different language of education. It'll be obvious on its face. The kids will be learning, and you'll just be able to tell. I have a link here to a 1-minute board meeting. This is in Little Rock, Arkansas. And the board members are talking about a program called Ignite, which is one of the better safety nets. Actually, Ignite came out of that Right to Read movie. And when they found out that there was, how things were going virtually, they decided to then take that and build a program around it. And you have Ignite, and it's based in some of the work by Dr. Sharon Walpole's differentiated instruction book, and I'll talk a little bit about that later too. But this is something that I want you to listen to how they respond. You can have committees, you can have working groups, and they'll have rubrics and all the rest. When it works, you know it. Just listen to this board member's response to this.
For questions. I know the ladies beside me would be happy to answer any that you may have as well.
Any questions? Not everybody. Director Adams.
I would love to hear from the principals just their summary of their thoughts with it, but I just want to make a comment. I've now been on the school board for probably a total of 7 years and sat through hundreds of hours of school board meetings and presentations. This is the most exciting thing I have ever seen. for students. I've never seen anything like this in all the time that I've been exposed, and those of your educators would have much more experience, but I can tell you when I came away from Western Hills, when we went there, I was like, we've got to do this, and if it continues to show progress, and do it in as large a way as we can afford.
When you know, you know. You don't have to have a bunch of fancy buzzwords. You look at it, you see the kids learning, you look at the data, and you see them moving, and it becomes self-evident. So I urge you, as you're thinking through your interventions, to find something that clearly works, not because they have a great proposal or a buzzy title or a great brochure, but that the evidence is clear that it works for students. There's a hot link there to the Ignite program, but I'm sure there's many different programs. They don't pay me anything. I'm just trying to share best practices because districts need to have a safety net for kids. And there are lots of them out there, but they've got to be good. They've got to have evidence of results for kids. Okay. Next up, district folks, the pipeline of talent, the pipeline of educators should be aligned with how you're teaching reading. If the methods classes at the university are teaching teachers things that are different than what you're teaching them, their expertise is methods 1 and methods 2, and then they come to you and you're trying to do something different, now you have to spend additional professional development dollars to unteach things. And that's tough. You've got to figure out who you can trust, who you can go to, who's aligned, and you have leverage. Go to the university and say, hey, we want to know how you're teaching methods. We'd love to see your syllabi for both classes. We want to see them. And that's within your right and your purview to do. When you go here, you can click here and it'll take you to the National Council of Teacher Qualities reading foundations scores or ratings for the states, for Philadelphia's universities. Now let's go to site leadership. So now it's a little bit different from district leadership. It's site leadership, you know, the main thing I would offer is that site leaders, principals, assistant principals, instructional leads, coaches, etc. We have to learn alongside the teachers. There is a call for professional development and a proficiency that we have to have so that we can serve our teachers effectively so that they can then serve the kids. Right? It's very, very important. This is a link to one of the best professional development sites in the country. Mississippi now uses them. Their Department of Education now uses AIM. They had other things, but they said this one was better. So using it, that's why I'm elevating them. It's really, really good. They also have an institute, I believe, in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania. And K-12, focusing on students with dyslexia, and it's college prep. And they hold a symposium every year. So it's a local resource and it's good. That's why I'm elevating them for you all. Also for site leadership, here are some other things. So these things usually aren't talked about, but they're important. We have to, all these technical things. The days of just being a manager are pretty much over. We have to be instructional leaders today. We have to be able to provide good, consistent, quality feedback. Consistently is the key. We have to be able to lead a data-driven culture and make sure that we and our staff is proficient with that. And when I say various access points, it means that different staff members are at different places in their career. They have different levels of bandwidth. We have to make sure they have access or entry points that fits their needs. So that means there may be some who are ready for a graduate level class like core or letters or something like that, or Orton Gillingham. But there's others who, 3 hours in the weekend, reading league. Hey, it gets you started. And it's aligned. They have to be aligned. But it's being mindful of our people and giving them a variety of different options to slot in with a stipend for their time. And then you have AIM, which is in the middle, AIM Pathways. It's not the reading league, which is more of a smaller nugget, and it's not the Orton Gillingham graduate level class. It's kind of in the middle, which most people tend to appreciate having those options available to them. And then number 8, I want to focus on a little bit here because that's not something we talk about. You're talking about change management. This is tough. And so we have to be able to monitor the health and well-being of our staff. Are the people okay? I'm not saying we have to baby people. I'm not saying that we, compromise our goals and our efforts, but I'm saying that if we're not attending to the humanity of our staff, what good are we? We have to make sure that we're monitoring the health and well-being of the staff. As a principal, I knew which one of our teachers were going through some medical situations if they shared it. I knew which ones may have been going through some things at home, or they had a special needs child at home, or whatever it was. And I am going to be honest with them and talk with them and support them. I want them to be well. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, because the healthier they are, the better they can show up for kids. So we have to be mindful. And also, as site leaders, looking at number 11, what's in the building that is served its usefulness, but it's no longer needed? But we got to get rid of the clutter. So I use this example of a boxing trainer because he's got the towel throwing in. So when a boxer is really struggling, the trainer has the ability to throw in the towel, and then the referee will stop the fight. And back to my amateur boxing days, as a high schooler, you just have to trust. You have to trust who's in your corner, that they have your best interest at heart. And when you trust them, you can fully invest in the task at hand. But if you're in the back of your mind, you're wondering, I think I'm on my own here. I think they might just let me fall off a cliff and nobody will come get me. You can only show up so much. But when people know that you have their back, that they know that you're looking after them professionally, and to the degree you allow them to personally, it allows them to open up and go after it and take some risks. Okay. Then there are the things that don't necessarily come on a rubric, but that absolutely impact the success or the lack of success for any initiative. If we're going to shift towards the science of reading, building leaders, coaches, we have to deal with these adaptive challenges as well, because change is tough. And what may look like is just resistance because people don't like you or don't like me. It may be a bunch of other things. And so we have to make sure that these things are clear and that we invest in them in an ongoing way. It's nice to have a vision statement, that's fine, but are we clarifying it? Are we reviewing it? Are we looking at what we're doing in relationship to it? Do we have the resources? Is the action plan clear? Do people have the skills? Do they need the professional development? So while we oftentimes focus on the things on the right, as leaders, whether you be a building leader, a grade level lead, an instructional leadership team member, et cetera, we have to look inside the boxes here to identify the things that we need to improve. Okay, so, but Kareem, these things, shouldn't that be the district's responsibility? Why would the principal have to deal with any of this stuff? What about the policymakers? Let me just say it rolls downhill. So school principals, guess what? Whether or not it's a district prerogative, at the end of the day, the folks in your building are looking at you. So we have to make sure that these things are in place. And if that means leading from behind and urging the folks ahead of us on the org chart to attend to these things, so be it. And that includes when we adopt curriculum, making sure that it's useful for people at all experience levels. Most adoption committees are staffed by people who are veteran, 10, 15, 20 years experience, and they have the bandwidth and the time to go through the committee process. But most of our most vulnerable children are served by newer teachers. They have to be considered when we're making these choices for materials and for assessments. And when we design our frameworks and we design our observation templates, et cetera. I won't go over each of these. You can click on them later, go through this and look at them. These are all things that building leaders need to do. All right. What about the teachers? We waited long enough, doggone it. What about us? What about the teachers? Let's go. So the first thing is we want to dive into the logistics, the nuts and bolts. I just want us to pause and ask ourselves some questions that we rarely are asked. And I can tell you as a principal, I was principal of a couple of different schools. One was a Department of Juvenile Justice school, another one was which was mostly, I'd say, 7th grade to 12th grade. And then a children's home or an orphanage, which was K-12 down in South Carolina. And then in Oakland, I was a principal elementary school and did some work in secondary as well. So we don't ask these questions. This is not the principal taking care. This is us taking care of ourselves as educators, as teachers. You know how you're in the plane and they say, put your mask on first? We have to put our mask on first. I know you probably didn't expect to see this, but this is the truth, doggone it. We have to ask ourselves, are we physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, economically, familially, are we taking care of? Because if not, those things will bleed into our ability to serve kids. They just will. We need to be able to show up as our whole self, not partial. When I say spiritually, I mean your peace and joy. I don't whatever faith you have or don't have, but it's your peace and your joy. Are you at peace when you come into the building, or are you a tempest? Those things that are intellectually stimulating to us, have we been cultivating those interests and those pursuits? Are we doing those things? How quickly do we go from 0 to 100? We can't, everyone can't be on our last nerve. If that's the case, then we have some work to do. And that means physically, that's simple things. Are we drinking water? Are we exercising? And I'm not going to, in the last one, familially, it's wonderful to want to serve kids and to support them and to be a social justice warrior on behalf of children, families, and communities. But we can't be hypocrites. Social justice starts at home. Whatever you consider home to be, whoever is in that bucket. They may not live with you, but are we taking care of home? Because if not, that's going to be on our mind or it's going to be on our hearts. And there's work oftentimes that has to be done that shows up in the building that didn't generate and didn't start from the building. So I just want to start with this and urge everyone to do a self-evaluation on what are some things that we could do to make sure we're well, especially during the summer when we have time to reboot. These things, you may have seen these things before, but when we do, we want to be able to show up, we want to be able to show up with these characteristics. And the only way we can do that is to make sure that we are ready in all those different ways. Okay, now again, here's another list. So for teachers, now the nuts and bolts of it. Foundational reading skill cannot be or must not be consigned to the margins of instruction in terms of time, in terms of resources, or focus. It's reflected in our schedule, it's reflected in our curriculum, it's reflected in our planning. Foundational reading skill is key to student success. And if the system has chosen a curricula that bifurcates reading, the comprehension, ELA activities with the foundational reading elements, that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. As I said, we don't want a Frankenstein monster on our hands. We want to be, we want to be the same. We want to be all in one. It's unfortunate, but we have to make sure as educators on the ground that foundational reading skills are part of the core. Then next, ongoing oral language development or ELD throughout the content area. So if I'm a high school biology teacher, guess what? I'm doing oral language development. If I'm a history teacher, it's oral language development. And I have a language goal alongside my content goal. You can start with at least 2 a week. As an educator, I had it every day. And it's supercharged the kids' learning. Supercharged. And if everyone is doing that in every class, that means that kids are being developed linguistically as well as they are through content. Complex texts, is one of the shifts in the Common Core, just as being grounded in evidence and being able to read, write, and speak from that evidence, and then building knowledge. All those things, these are things we just have to do. If we want to get kids to be college and career ready, we have to make sure we're developing language, and we also have to make sure they have access to complex text. And so, especially for my secondary friends, I'm sure you've heard this, I'm not a reading teacher. I don't teach that. I teach history or whatever it is. Everyone's a reading teacher. And the last one there is, or the second to last one, vertical alignment. So access to complex texts largely depends on the knowledge that we have on a specific topic. You can look at Marilyn Adams' seminal work, where she wrote about this. It is critical that kids know things about certain topics, because that allows them to access more and more complex texts in that topic. And everyone in the building, whether you're middle school, high school, or elementary school, has to have the breakthrough skill. And administrators, you have to make sure that your folks have this breakthrough skill. Grade level chairs, everyone has to have this. What is that skill? This is the thing. Like, you have to be able to disrupt failure and disrupt the forlorn personality trait that emerges when kids are not successful. And you do that through word study. So everyone ought to be able to break down a word. What do I mean by that? Here's an example of how I would do it. I would take the word introduction. It's not just me. This is an example of how it can be done. I would take the word introduction, and I would say, okay, here's the word introduction, and we're gonna do this in 5 minutes or less, by the way. Here's all the different languages that are related to that word. Look at all these cognates in different languages. And in Latin, interus is the antecedent, it's the origin, it's the base of this word in English. Interus, enter, right? So I would take that, then I would say, duco, we're building the word introduction, duco or ducare or duke, and all these different words come from it. So I'm showing the students, hey, listen, that's where duke comes from, and duchess and duct and aqueduct, because it means to lead. It means to lead. When you show them this, you see where the prefix comes from, you see where the root of the word comes from, and then the suffix, shun, it turns something into a verb, into a thing, and we talk about that a little bit, and give them opportunity to do that. 5 minutes or less. We put it back together, introduction, kids are so happy. Because now, listen, I may have thought that I wasn't that smart, but now I'm in here learning, I'm learning what word origins are from the etymology, the construction of the word. Now I'm in the language, and it empowers me. It makes me, and now these become Legos to me. Word and language opens up not just the understanding of it, but the actual construction of it itself. Now words like educated, now I begin to look for these pieces. It is fully empowering for students to have consistent access to word study. So I mentioned earlier that I would share some things about Seaford, Delaware. So we at Fulcrum, we actually took some folks down to Seaford. I mean, look, when you go from the worst in the state to tops in the state, and that, by the way, they flew in the Philly airport and took a bus down to Seaford, and they've got a lot going on in Seaford. They've had some really tough times. When you're almost taken over by the state, the stress is high. But I asked them a question about where they begin, and I wanted to share that with you. So these 3 clips, and again, you can see the rest of them at your own leisure. The full question and answer. I mean, we visited schools, we talked to teachers and principals. Then we had a debrief where board president and vice president, superintendent and chief academic officer and principals came together. The NAACP president from Maryland was there. Although this is Delaware, they're neighbors, as you all know. And so that's here. Full Q&A an hour, unedited, there you go. This is an actual clip from, we're going to turn into some sort of a film or something, we'll see, but something that people can see and kind of come along the journey with us, because it is phenomenal. But this I gotta show you this. This is edited. It's just clips of them answering the question, what did you do? And recommendations on what to do.
What are the first few decisions you made in trying to change things?
At that time, we had a really fantastic group of leaders at their district office. And they determined that we were going to start our partnership with the University of Delaware and Dr. Walpole and her team. And we started with professional learning, primarily with small group instruction, so that students would get exactly what they needed during the small group time. And we started with our reading specialists, and they were trained on the differentiated instruction block. And then when they started to see results, more people wanted it, because success breeds success. And when they saw students that they believed couldn't or hadn't been successful before, and they started to become successful and advance through the skills, then other people said, well, what's that? Oh, that works. What else can we do? And so then Dr. Walpole joined us again and said, hey, we can read a novel. We can read real books with kids. And she started showing us and all of the teachers, leaders, teachers, everybody got in the room and got to hear the message. And they were invited to try. And that's really how we started. We started with people who were willing, and we started to build success. And then it just grew and grew from there.
You're gonna have folks, well, okay, you don't have to believe in it, but you're gonna do it.
You get to that.
And then you're gonna see the results, and then you can believe. So you don't necessarily have to believe in it first. And on an intellectual way, even if you didn't believe that it could work, you knew that you needed to do something different, right? Like, we didn't want to be last, so we knew we needed to do something different. And so
This is one of the key, so it's very, very important. If you look at the book Driven by Data and then Leverage Leadership by Paul Bambrick and Toyo, you do not try to change beliefs. You change practice. And when the results come, then there's dissonance they got to wrestle with.
That's right.
Well, why did that happen? Now the beliefs can begin to change. But what a lot of system leaders and community advocates, where they go wrong is they spend all their time circulating the beliefs. So we're talking about prejudice and racism and classism and this and that and your belief in all kids and all that stuff. And by the time you finish arguing with that, they're gone, you gone, and the initiative just died. The money didn't ran out. I just need you to, here's a template for the data-driven instruction for this cycle, for this, look at this standard, that they did 2 right on this one, and the same standard this one they missed wrong, what did they get wrong? Well, why did they, so you drill down to the details.
From there.
I don't think of DI as tier 1. So I give me 2 minutes to make the case.
Let me just pause this. This is Dr. Sharon Walpole. She is the co-designer of the curriculum in the country with the best student achievement results, bar none. And she's a reading researcher. And so she is, what some people were saying is we can't get a new curriculum, right? We just got a new curriculum, right? So what can we do? And this was her response to that. She's going to make the case.
So the tier 1 foundational skills instruction, if you saw a word study today, that's the tier 1 foundational skills instruction. Everybody gets the same, right? DI is a multiple entry phonic or foundational skills curriculum. It was designed to be MTSS. So MTS, just because everybody gets something, doesn't mean it's tier 1. Right. Because it's a multiple entry skills curriculum based on diagnostic data. So that's how I think of it. Everyone gets it.
Just because everyone's sitting in tier 1, getting the same thing doesn't mean it's tier 1. Are they getting what they need? And so that curriculum was designed to be able to do that, multiple entries. The title is, in fact, I'll go back so you can see so that you can, well, you'll see the book later. I have it elevated a little bit later, and a link to where you can find it. The book costs $29. You know, we do books. We're going to have book studies in Oakland next year. Teams of teachers. We don't have to have a new adoption cycle. I mean, it's great if we had, but you can start that today, $29, and get that and think about how you're walking through lessons that there are multiple entries for kids at various skill levels in tier 1. Okay. The abstract then goes on to say, what about oral language and change management, leadership, and usability, and all those things? I wanted to explicitly lay this out in a way that people could see and understand. We know about these 5 pillars, the phonics and the phonemic awareness, and we oftentimes get stuck in these. Then these are very important. You got to have these, and you need to have writing to go with it. Writing brings it all together, right? And underneath that, there's oral language development. It's not just for second language learners. Oral language development is for all kids. All kids need to have their language developed consistently, systematically, and directly taught. And the last thing under here is love. And I know sometimes I've said this a few other times, but people think of love as being some something that's just soft and fuzzy. And let me say, sometimes love is hard. Sometimes, if you've got kids or you're married and family stuff going on, and sometimes love is tough. And so it's not just giving a kid a hug, but it's doing the things to prepare for them so they can be served in tier 1. That's love, right? And I talked about planning time and curriculum. Those things have to match. All that's the foundation of all this. All this stuff rests. If you're planning time, curriculum, this whole thing is a house of cards. System leaders, building leaders. What are we asking people to do? And do we have evidence that it works? And is it doable? But that's what love is, love, functionally speaking. So I have this slide here so that you can just click on these, different resources and see them for yourself. So they mentioned that they went to a university first. That's this University of Delaware. So there's a slide deck they offered, they provided me for this to show how they provide coaching to systems. I would highly recommend using them. They're phenomenal, phenomenal. And they're pretty much your neighbors. They're not that far from you. And so, they have a section of their school success center where you can partner with them and they will help you. They will help you navigate some of these things. At the very least, when you click that link, you can engage with them and see if it's something that you're interested in. Student Achievement Partners, they identify things. Let me go ahead and click there. They identify things that we look for when we choose curriculum. Let me see if I can find this for you. Here we go. And you see here, A through F is what we usually focus on. Well, I'm urging everyone, this is why I clicked this here, to look not just at A through F, but to look down here. These are all the stuff that comes in our rubrics usually. But what about this? Notes for consideration, the things that no one talks about. Student achievement data. Does it work? I would submit that should be the number one thing you're looking for. Does it work? Not publisher reported data, federal data, peer-reviewed studies, things like third-party case. This is what you're looking for. If they don't have this, then you're treating kids like guinea pigs, and your teachers too. Learning curve. How tough is this thing to learn? These notes for consideration ought to be the first thing you look at. Does it work? How hard is it to do? And just be honest about the fit for your system. Okay, let's keep going. The path to alignment. So Common Core provides us with 3 shifts. Complex text, we should have things grounded in evidence and building knowledge. I want to give you another example. What's my time looking? So here's an example of that. This was a class I had, I don't know how many years ago, 15 years ago or more by now. Oral language development. So I took second language learners mostly and had them unpack or break down Patrick Henry's "Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death" speech. On the left, you see the Old English version. On the right, you see what they came up with. And they gave a reading of what they came up with. And I'll play like 20 seconds of it.
It is in vain, sir, to stimulate the matter. Gentlemen may cry peace, peace, but there is no peace.
So they read here, and now they'll read their own words here.
We will bring to our ears gunfire. The other colonies are already fighting.
I can't hear you.
The other colonies are already fighting. Why are we here? What are you waiting for?
So this is an example of English language development, and oral language development. They talked in groups. Often you're talking about people who had just begun to learn to speak the language in the same group with native-born English speakers, whatever their home language, in the same group, working together over the course of a week to break down this complex text so that they can be prepared for college and career readiness. And every one of these kids ended up graduating from college. Here's one of them. She's now an engineer, and she reflects on the expectations. I'm just going to play a couple of minutes of this clip for you. Were you aware of your progress?
What I remember is I came to the US and then I started in your class, and then a few months later, I was able to understand pretty well what was going on. Perhaps I couldn't speak it, but I was able to understand very well. And then a few months later, my mom received, or we got a notification somehow that she needed to go to the OUSC to get certification that I was fluent. I probably took a test or something. That's what I remember. So I could tell that I was progressing because of this test and because I could understand, but I wasn't aware, like outside of myself, if what I was saying was clear. I just, from my point of view, I think this is what a lot of kids do, right? From their point of view, is this is how it is, and if you don't understand, I don't know what to tell you.
So the district's expectations of what a kid should be able to do may not always line up with, like, you were still learning.
For sure.
But they were like, she's good. Like,
yeah. I do remember this because I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'm fluent 3 months or something like that. And I was like, but I did learn a lot more after it, and I continued, of course, studying until like high school and after, and I was learning something new every day. Yeah.
Well, I didn't want to throw water on your. Okay. So I share that because I want everyone to know that oral language development, English language development, and oral language development, it is the jet fuel to take your kids from 0 to 100. If you do it consistently, the word study, the breaking down the etymology of words, unpacking meaning and cognates, and they thought that our kids were cheating. They literally thought they were cheating, but they were just, it's the jet fuel. So I urge everyone, and guess what? English language development is good for other kids besides second language learners. It could be good for anyone. All right, let's keep it moving. We're almost to the end here. Really quickly, the ACT has a report. You can click on it later. And basically, they say the thing that is the clearest differentiator between students who are college ready and those who are not is their ability to comprehend complex text. So breaking down that Patrick Henry speech, that's how we know who's going to be able to succeed in college or who's going to go there and really, really struggle. That's what ACT is saying. And so with that, there's some stuff that it's going to be tough. The number one thing is that's not my job mindset. I'm a secondary teacher. I teach math. I don't do that. We've got to get past that mindset. we've got to make sure that we're maintaining a sustainable path. That means personally, as well as the programming materials that we are selecting. Everyone has to be a leadership. The teachers have to own this. This cannot be something that comes down from central office. Teachers have to own this. And so I commend you all for being here today. And then, of course, as we went over managing change, developing leadership, and the ongoing communication. Last couple of things. Is going to be difficult to perceive this because the general population, in terms of how we learn to read, most of us as educators, it came very easily to us. Only about 60%, well, educators, most of us, it came very easy to us. Only about 9% struggled, but the general population is different for it. So it's different for us to perceive what's needed, and our default settings oftentimes don't line up. And so when we choose curriculum and materials and methods, we tend to go for the more complicated one. What we really need to do is have something that is clear, concise, and productive and effective. And most importantly in all of this is love. We have to make sure that what we're doing is grounded in love. Now, I don't just mean love as being, there's nothing wrong with a hug. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is we have to have love operationalized. I often tell people love is a lesson plan. Doggone it. It's the things that we do. And we have to make sure that we have the bandwidth to pay attention to detail and do all the things that are important. Now, lastly, I'm not going to skip these 8 demands we made in Oakland. You can see those later. But I'm actually going to show you this to close out. It's 5 minutes, and I want you all to see what it looks like when someone actually does these things. When you'll see the word study and the oral language development, when they have plays, and you'll hear little boys say, we learn to read hard words. All of what we've been talking about. It is doable. And I'll close with this.
16 years ago, we broadcast a story about Marva Collins, a Chicago teacher who started her own elementary school on the city's west side prep. Marva claimed that with love, hard work, and no-nonsense teaching, inner-city children could compete with anyone academically. It was, to many people, quite an inspiring story. But not to Charles Murray, author of the controversial book about race and intelligence called The Bell Curve. On page 399, Murray writes that Marva's celebrated anecdotes about her students are too good to be true. We traced 33 of the 34 and flew a group of them back to Chicago, back to West Side Prep's new location for a reunion of sorts.
Aren't you pretty?
To see if Charles Murray's allegations in the Bell Curve are true, to see whether or not these young men and women lived up to Marva's claims. Christopher Stubblefield,
We learned to read hard words.
the 8-year-old with a big voice, is now at university in Texas, and Erica McCoy Pace graduated last spring from Norfolk State University. When you saw her last, she was listing her favorite authors.
Emerson, Henry David Thoreau.
And what about the rest of our class of 79?
Michael Anderson, Taylor. Terry Holmes, owner-operator of transportation company.
Latanya Singleton, preschool teacher.
James Lowe, Staff Sergeant, United States Air Force.
Sabrina Yates, 6th grade teacher.
Russell Winters, law student.
Louis Johnson, Operations Manager. Xavier Jones, teacher, criminal justice major. Craig Brunner, clerk for the State's Attorney's Office.
She just gave so much to me personally in terms of always being reassuring. I mean, just the small things, like she would grab my face and say, pretty girl.
Yeah. Honey, you're brilliant.
That's right.
Especially Craig. She would take his head and raise it up. Speak up, honey, you're brilliant.
That's right.
And, after someone telling you that
Every day,
5 days a week, for 3 or 4 years, that's in you. That becomes a part of you. You are brilliant, honey.
And then we were doing Shakespeare. We put on the plays, and we had the three witches wrestle with the witch. Yeah, it was fun.
But Charles Murray stated that claims of long-term academic achievement would typically fade as these children grow up.
Sagacious means what? Means you're very what? Bright.
The words that we learned, it was nice because when we left and we heard someone talking, using a word, we knew what that word meant. And now in school, a lot of times we get the reading list on the course outline. I read most of the books on there. You know, it's like, oh yeah, I read that, or the teacher will be talking about something, and I'm like, oh yeah, I read that book. All the students may feel like this.
Murray also raised questions about Marva's claims that 5 and 10-year-olds who'd been labeled unteachable were capable of reading Chaucer and Shakespeare. Well, Michael Anderson was said to have a learning disability when he entered Marva's school at age 9.
I had a client just a couple months ago, brought up Shakespeare out of nowhere. And we sat after having coffee for 3 hours. You know, well, what did you learn Shakespeare? 4th grade. I knocked him off his feet. He couldn't believe it. 4th grade?
And there is Erica, who was considered a hopeless case at age 6.
Basically, I was told that I was borderline retarded, that I would never read. So I was basically written off.
I was supposed to be put back a couple of grades, but I wasn't when I came to Miss Collins.
When we saw Craig Brunner in 1979, he was reading his essay about Cleopatra.
Very, very long ago, there was a queen called...
What was the secret of her success, of motivation, or what?
The confidence, how you have a brain, you can do it on your own. You don't have to wait for anybody.
She killed herself with a poisonous snake. Very, very good.
These days, her message and methods are repeated by teachers she's trained for her 3 elementary schools in Chicago. She is mostly on the road, giving seminars for teachers all over the country. Above all, she tells them every child is teachable. Every child can learn. Of those not at the reunion, a number, like Brian Gurley, are still in college. Most of the rest are working. Michael Singleton is a Chicago police officer. 2 others are corrections officers. Darius Daniels is the office manager of an insurance agency. 2 others are salesmen. Michael Ridley is a buyer in the restaurant business. Felisa Felder graduated from Loyola and works for a large brokerage house in Chicago. This January, she enters Loyola Law School. And Erica Pace, she wants to open a long-term homeless shelter. Erica, once described as retarded, graduated from college last May, summa cum laude.
I want to end there because it is wholly possible to serve our students and lead them where they need to go when they access complex text consistently, when the foundational reading skills are in place, and when we undergird it all with love. And then we support our educators, including our principals, to do what they need to do. I appreciate your attention. I hope something was edifying that you'll be able to grow from. You feel free to access that QR code or the link. And remember, the images are live. You can just click there or touch there, and you'll be able to go to the various resources. So with that, Jeannie, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver, for sharing your insights with us this afternoon. You know, at the beginning of the session, you asked us to consider equity as an indicator of the work we have left for us to do. And it's clear that we have much work left to do. It's good work, right? So thank you again for spending this time with us. We want to thank all of our symposium participants for your attendance today. We will begin again for day 3 at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Have a great evening.